Lunges are one of the most difficult exercises in the HYROX race. This is not only because of their placement in the race towards the end, but also due to their movement mechanics. In this video, you will learn everything you need to know to master them for your next HYROX race. Okay, let's get right into the lunges. The lunges are not only about strength and mobility, but also about balance. That's why we're going to start with the most simple step, which is a split squat that is stationary. So Anais is going to put her feet into a position she would do the lunge from, and then is just going to do a stationary split squat where she's bringing the back knee gently to the floor, just touching ever so slightly, and then coming back up without moving her feet. And then we do this for a couple of repetitions to really get the control and a stable base in the bottom. Here what you want to do is you always want to have the knee in one line with the toe, as well as roughly a 90-degree angle in both knees, so you're really stable. In the bottom position, we want to keep our pelvis upright and don't want to go into a spinal hyperextension. Roughly a 90-degree angle in both knees. The knee is always tracking in line with the toe, and we want to have a stable platform, especially with the front foot, where we push through the heels and don't lift our heel while we press up and relax. And here it's just important that the mechanics always stay the exact same. That means our knee is tracking in line with the toe and we have a roughly 90-degree angle in both knees. So Anais is now going to step forward into the lunge and then comes back up into the upright position. And here we usually alternate legs. This is a nice exercise, a nice bodyweight exercise to practice the lunge that you can throw in with some running to practice the basic mechanics. Usually when we do the forward stepping lunge, it's a bit more similar to the walking lunge, but it's also a bit less stable. So another variation would be the bodyweight reverse lunge, where we actually step back. So here we have a bit more glute involvement, but the mechanics stay the exact same. So we're also looking for a gentle touch of the knee with the floor, as well as a 90-degree angle in both knees. Also, here you want to be cautious with your orientation of your pelvis. As we said with the split squats, you want to keep it upright and want to keep your core engaged so your spine always stays neutral without hyperextending in the bottom. Now we move on to a walking lunge. A walking lunge requires a little bit more balance. So what we would recommend first is that you stop between each repetition before you practice the stepping through style, which is a bit quicker. So now Anais is going to perform a walking lunge where she's going to do 3 lunge steps, always with a pause at the top. The pausing at the top allows you to regain balance and always start from a stable position without having any perturbation or imbalances. Once we have mastered this, we can step through, which obviously is a lot more efficient and saves us a lot of time. So this is how we want to practice our lunges when we do bodyweight walking lunges, but also weighted walking lunges later on. So now Anais is going to demonstrate a step through walking lunge without a pause at the top. As with every lunging that we practice, we want to practice as we do it in competition. That means it's very important that we always adhere to the movement standards. And the movement standards for the lunge are relatively simple. We don't take any stutter steps where we move forward without lunging. We always touch our knee to the floor, and we also go through an upright position where our hips and knees are extended at the top. This is something that is very important to keep in mind, and you always want to practice as you compete. Now we talk a bit about the most common errors with the lunge. One is losing balance at the top. We have just spoken about that taking an extra step to regain balance at the top really helps you, but another thing to consider is the width of your feet or the width of your base when you do the lunge. Something you want to avoid is that you have your feet too close in line to each other. So if Anais steps here, we have kind of a line in the floor, and you can use this as an indication. So you don't want to place your feet on top of the line. You want to be one foot next to the line and the other one on the other side of the line as you do your lunges. This is a nice drill to practice to always keep your base stable. Another common error with the lunge is that we see the upper body collapse forward and we turn it into a hip extension movement. What you always want to think about is extending your hips and your knees at the same time. Usually when we do body weight lunges, this is not too much of a problem, but once the lunge gets loaded, especially from the top, like with the sandbag, we often see that the upper body is folding forward. This is something we want to avoid by consciously driving our foot into the ground while extending our hip at the same time. So to practice this, we would recommend doing the lunge with something behind your neck, as you would do in competition, for example with a sandbag or a dumbbell. For now, Anais is just going to demonstrate with one dumbbell, and as she does the lunge, she touches her knee gently to the floor and extends knee and hip at the same time, so that our shoulders always rise first without the upper body collapsing. Once this has become easy, we can make this movement a bit more challenging by using, for example, a kettlebell that we hold in the goblet position. The kettlebell will be in the front of our center of mass. That means it will be a bit more of a challenge to stay upright. So we train this aspect a bit more, as we need to focus on the hip extension, on the active hip extension, a bit more in detail. So now Anais is going to grab a kettlebell and she will hold it in front of her body in the goblet position and is going to do a couple lunge steps. And as the kettlebell is in front of our center of mass, it makes it even more difficult to extend our hips at the same time as our knees and not collapse forward. So this is a good exercise to practice if you struggle with this aspect in particular. Obviously, there's a plethora of different options you can do for your walking lunges. The next thing we're going to show you is the farmer's walking lunge. The farmer's walking lunge can be performed with dumbbells or kettlebells. We have here dumbbells for the demonstration. It's a great exercise because it also trains your grip, which can carry over to the farmer's carry, and it places the load close to the floor, which makes it a bit easier, so you can load it a bit heavier and use heavier weights. So here Anais is going to pick up the dumbbells. This could be kettlebells as well, and she's going to practice her walking lunges like this. Here the demands for the hip extensions aren't necessarily as high because we have the weight closer to the ground. And as I said earlier, this allows us to train with some heavier weights. As always, we recommend training with as much variation as possible, so you're always ready for what happens in the race, and you also stay injury-free for as long as possible because your body has to adapt to different stimuli across the board. The final variation of lunging we're going to show you is the most specific one towards HYROX, and this is going to be with a sandbag. For the HYROX race, it's important that we have the load distributed evenly across both shoulders, and we don't just load one shoulder, because then we create more instability to the side, and that obviously makes it a lot more difficult to brace the core in the bottom position. So here, as you can see, the load is distributed evenly across the shoulders, and Anais is starting always from an upright position. It's also important to remember that you're not allowed to put the sandbag down. So once it is in this position, it needs to stay in this position. But the mechanics stay the exact same as for all the other variations of lunging. So now Anais is going to demonstrate a couple of repetitions with the sandbag. Now, what are some additional things that you can do to improve your lunging performance? The first one, which is the biggest one, is mobility. So for mobility, we really want to open the front of our thigh muscle, like our quadriceps, as well as a hip flexor. If these are very tight, they limit our range of motion in the bottom and often lead the spine to overextending. So what Anais is going to do now, she's going to take a large, long step forward, place the back knee on the floor, and now tries to stay as upright as possible. What usually intensifies the stretch is squeezing the bum where the knee is touching the floor and pushing the hips forward. Here you should really feel a deep stretch in the front of your thigh as well as your hip flexor. We usually recommend doing this a couple of times before you start your lunging, just to really open up this position, as this is also very specific to the actual lunging. We would recommend 2 rounds of 30 to 45 seconds each side. The second thing we can do to improve our lunging is obviously strength training. Here you can use all of the different exercises we've showed you and load them in various ways. That means you can use barbells, kettlebells, different kinds of sandbags, maybe even a wall ball, and integrate them into your strength routine as well as your workouts. Now, if you're interested in how we would go about programming these things to progress your lunging, you can check out our programs in the description. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.